Thank you for the introduction, and thank you everyone for being here. And yeah, it was pointed to me that the affiliations are not renumbered. So number 3 should be QuSoft, and number 4 should be the Freie University. So with that, today I'll be talking about the interactions between water molecule and oxides in general, using quantum algorithms. And this project is in collaboration between Toyota Motors Europe, that's why Sachin is here, and Luke from the Freie University, and obviously Kanda. Yeah, first of all, I would like to acknowledge the University of Amsterdam, the CWI and QuSoft for hosting me here, and then the Freie University for organizational facilities. And I have extensively used the computational facilities from SURF, and some of my quantum calculations were done on the IBM quantum computers. And the code I have used for this these calculations was originally developed by Sarviolis. And this is the group that I've been associated with. So Emil, Dion, Shulok, Stefano, and Edison. And for the quantum applications lab, so through them, I got access to the IBM quantum computers, and then obviously the colleagues from algorithms and complexity group at the CWI. They have been wonderful in the past 1.5 years. So today's talk would more like, first I'll introduce what is computational quantum chemistry, which is performing quantum chemistry calculations on traditional classical computers, and then what is quantum computational chemistry, and then why do we need quantum computers in chemistry, and then I will briefly introduce the problem I've been working on, that is the heterogeneous photocatalysis, and I will explain what a general photocatalysis mechanism looks like. And then, yeah, I'll just mention about VQE because everyone knows about it. And then I'll briefly talk about the state average orbital-optimized VQE, the algorithm that we have used for our problem. And then I'll present the results of basically, yeah, 2 projects that I've been working on, and give a brief summary and outlook. So, yeah, I had the confidence to put this slide up, but so electronic structure problem, when restricted to fixed single particle basis and fixed number of electrons, is QMA complete. And so we all know that there's unlikely that there could be an efficient solution even with a quantum computer. And since it is a problem is said to be QMA complete, so if it is QMA hard and is in QMA, so and then the analog of QMA hard is NP hard. So there is a need for heuristics, because with the heuristic approach, we can find some solution in a reasonable time frame that is good enough to solve a problem at hand. So this is why chemists are relying more on heuristics, because this has been one of the criticisms that I've been listening for over the past 2 or 3 years. So I just wanted to make clear. So in case if you need a solution to a problem, so that is the reason why chemists rely on heuristics. And this is one of the phrases that's making rounds in the quantum computing community. The chemistry is the killer app, and this appeared in the chemistry and engineering news in 2017. And it says that chemistry is quantum computer's killer app. But when you read the article, and basically the physicists expect that the chemistry simulations will be quantum computing's killer app. So it's basically an expectation. So still it is an expectation. And the next one, I think one of the most abused number in the literature in the past 5 years, although this existed in the past 20 years, the magic number of 1 kilocal per mole, which is the chemical accuracy. Where did this come from? So this was basically introduced by John Pople, one of the Nobel Prize recipients in 1998. He mentioned in his Nobel lecture that as the model becomes quantitative, the target should be the data as reproduced and predicted within experimental accuracy. For example, like for heats of formation and ionization potential, the global accuracy of 1 kilocal per mole would be appropriate. But is the model quantitative yet? I don't think so. So this reminded me of the song that I used to listen with my daughter, where the kids in the backseat ask, "Are we there yet?" I would say not yet. So chemistry did not and does not require full configuration energy in the complete basis set limit for understanding chemical reactions. And getting closer to full configuration interaction total energies using minimal basis set like STO3G that's been published so far in the literature is not very useful. So we need energies with the basis sets larger than minimal basis set, and we don't need the accuracy of full configuration interaction to understand chemistry. And what is the role of computations in chemistry?
So sorry, are you saying if you take a rich basis set, then you can get away with less than this famous number?
Yes, we can get there. We can get to the basically the couple plus the single doubles and perturbative triples. Almost it's almost there in this. It can achieve chemical accuracy, but there is a caveat that it can be applied to mostly single reference problems. So most of the chemistry can be understood using CCSDT is the gold standard in chemistry. And for computations in chemistry are useful in understanding and predicting chemical properties, and we can discover new chemical reaction mechanisms. Yeah, there have been few that were inaccessible to experiments and were found using computations. And cost and time efficiency. So cost in the sense buying chemicals, performing experiments one by one and analyzing them. Instead of that, we can run the computations and then at least we can predict some trends. But there's a big caveat here as well, because we cannot compare a computation directly to an experiment because the experimental conditions are very involved, I would say. And then most of the computations are done in a very clean settings. Like we focus on one particular thing, and what we can do is instead of directly comparing to experiments, we can identify descriptors, basically at the atomic level, what changes and what leads to the change in the reaction mechanism. So that's, we call it as, there can be some things that can describe a chemical reaction. So that we call it as descriptors, and we can compare trends in properties. Instead of absolutely comparing one computation with an experiment, we can calculate, since we have the opportunity to calculate for a few of perform computations for few of the chemical reactions, we can perform the computations and then we can basically compare the trend. So that's what is useful in chemistry as well. And this is also one of the questions I've been facing recently, that why are chemists so much worried about accurate ground state energies? What is there? So basically, any reaction mechanism has been so far been explained only using energies, mostly using energies. So basically, the idea is to construct a potential energy curve or a surface, which looks something like this. Basically, you can start with some reactant here, and it can it can attain some product. We can call it product A, and it can go to a product B. And this is like the saddle point or the maximum it has to, or the barrier, energy barrier, which it has to cross to attain the products.
What are these axes?
Yeah, it can be reaction coordinate. We can call like anything. Like if a bond is dissociating, one of the bonds can be one of the bond lengths can be one of the axes, and the distance between the two molecules can be another coordinate. That can be anything. So those are generally termed as reaction coordinates. And so this is completely based on energies. So the construction of a potential energy curve or a potential energy surface is a basic requirement in understanding chemistry. So that is why chemists are worried about ground state energies. And also when we need to go beyond, this is basically a static picture. So where we have a potential energy surface, we say that, okay, this is the minimum and this is another minimum. It goes from this minimum to another through a transition state. It crosses the energy barrier. But not all reactions follow this, because these computations are performed at 0 Kelvin and there is no effect of temperature, pressure, concentration or whatever. So, when we let these molecules move, for example, with ab initio molecular dynamics, where the dynamics is classical, we need again energies and the forces. again, energy plays an important role. And also, for certain reactions where quantum mechanical effects are important, we perform quantum wave packet dynamics as well, where we pre-calculate a potential energy surface like this, and we evolve a wave packet in time and see what is the probability of achieving a minimum here or here. And then based on the probabilities, we predict the reaction outcome. So energies are central quantities in chemistry. And one of the most successful theory is this, or the equation is the Arrhenius rate equation. So here we have this rate of a reaction, and here is this pre-exponential factor. And here you can see that this EA is the activation energy, which is the energy difference between, that represents the barrier which reaction needs to cross to attain the products. So this quantity EA is in the exponent, and even a small change causes large changes in the reaction rates. So chemists are after accurate activation energy. So if we get the activation energy correct, we usually get reliable reaction rates. So this is why energy is important in chemistry. And yeah, moving closer to today's topic, so I would like to introduce the concept of heterogeneous catalysis. And why is it difficult to model? So what do I mean by heterogeneous catalysis? Catalysis, as we know, is that something accelerates a chemical reaction. And in heterogeneous catalysis, for example, the catalyst is in a different phase compared to the reactants. So usually reactants are in solid phase, liquid phase, but and catalyst can also be in the solid or liquid, gas or liquid phase. And that in that case, we call it homogeneous reaction. Homogeneous catalysis, but in this case, since the catalyst is in a different phase from reactants, usually catalyst in heterogeneous catalysis reactions is in a solid state. So that is why it is heterogeneous catalysis. And the advantage of using heterogeneous catalysis is that this just participates. It helps to accelerate the reaction, but it is not consumed during the reaction. So it can be easily recovered. So that's the idea of heterogeneous catalysis. And one of the most famous example in the quantum computing community is the FIMO-CO. So I deliberately choose this picture rather than just the cartoon, because this is the FIMO-CO factor. And here you can see this, it is supposed to dissociate the nitrogen and form ammonia. And here you can see the complexity. So here you have these enzymes, and then here you have like 7 iron atoms and then sulfur atoms, and there is 1 molybdenum. It is more complicated than what we think. So when people are trying to calculate the active space that is required to get the single point energy of this particular cluster, I would like to show that this is more complex than we expect. This is the reaction network that has been calculated for simple diatomics. This is carbon monoxide and hydrogen that can lead to carbon dioxide, water, methane, methanol, and acetaldehyde and ethanol, like 6 products with just 2 reactants. And you can see how complex the reaction network is. So we cannot model this entire reaction network. So what we do is, we have 100 species, like 200 reactions and more than 2,000 pathways. So what we need to do is we need to simplify this to understand reaction. So and also these catalysts, as I mentioned, are supported metal nanoparticles. So we have oxide support, which is, and then we have these metal nanoparticles of different sizes and shapes, and we have different effects that's coming into picture. So we have perimeter sites here, and then when this interface is supposed to be inactive, just the oxide is supposed to only provide support, but also in some cases this can also assist in speeding up the reaction. And what we generally do in modeling is that we take the surface that is most exposed to the reactant molecules and we model it as a clean metal surface. So we just create a clean surface of that particular facet. So here the facet here is different and facet here is different. So we choose what we think is the most exposed facet to the reaction, and we construct a surface, 2D surface, which is like infinite X and Y, and we introduce a vacuum in Z so that the interaction between 2 slabs is minimal. And then we introduce the molecules and we study the reaction. And what we study here is the slowest step. So if we can increase the speed of the slowest step, then the reaction can be sped. So we identify the slowest step, which we call the rate determinant step, and we try to understand the reaction mechanism. And in most cases, the effect of solvent, concentration of the reactants, The pressure and temperature is mostly ignored. And we call this as the pressure gap and the materials gap in the, in the heterogeneous catalysis community. Basically, that's why I'm saying we will not be able to compare the computations directly with experiments. We need to only compare the trends, or we need to use descriptors to understand these reactions. And when we do calculate the potential energy curve for at this rate determining step, then we can have a more simplified picture that we are mostly used to. This is a textbook picture from a high school chemistry. So we have a reactants. The reaction without catalysis leads to products with a higher activation energy here, and the reaction with the catalyst leads to the products with a lower activation energy. So this is the most simplest picture. So this is only for the rate determining step. It's not for the entire reaction, just to make it clear. And what we use, we generally rely on density functional theory. This theory was proposed in 1964 by Hohenberg and Kohn, and then Kohn and Schramm came up with the equations, and it got traction. And in 1998, again with Poppel, Kohn as well got the Nobel Prize for this. And this theory is exact in principle, but when it comes to practice, the exchange correlation functional is not known. So what they do is that we have different flavors of this exchange correlation functional depending upon the problem. And right now we are more than 200 exchange correlation functional, and we are counting. So with machine learning, we have more and more exchange correlation functions coming up. This is still in 2012. And here now we have more than 200 exchange correlation functions. Depending upon the problem, we need to choose the exchange correlation function. So it's not, there is no particular exchange correlation function that is universal. So we have different levels of approximation, but there is no guarantee that one functional will work for a series of reactions. But it has predictive capability. So many people are using density functional theory because it has the predictive capability in spite of being a single reference method. So it can only handle ground states, but still it has the predictive capability. So yes, that is the reason why it has been successful in modeling heterogeneous catalysis. And one of the other reasons why it has been successful is that most of these heterogeneous catalysis reactions are thermally activated, which means that heat is being fed into the system to drive the reaction. So this is called thermal activation. And also the good thing about this is the heterogeneous catalysis reactions is that most of the reactions occur in the ground state. So there's no excited state, the interference of excited state is minimal. But there are limitations of density functional theory when even for ground state reactions with thermal activation. So it is single configurations, and we need to play this functional game. We need to identify the functional that works best for the system. That takes lots of effort. Unless and until we know the literature, it's very difficult to choose the right functional. And then this density functional theory cannot, with these approximated exchange correlation function, cannot capture the long range dispersion forces accurately. And when it comes to magnetic properties and spin, it almost fails. So there are some broken symmetry solutions that exist, but this spin contamination is nothing but the expectation value of the square operator, and that becomes like that is nowhere related to what we would expect for an ideal case. So this spin contamination is a problem, and the problem with density functional theory is that exact energy functional is it is not known until now, and maybe unknowable. That's what people say. So there is a need to go beyond density functional theory for modeling these kind of reactions, and we need a multi-configurational approach. So yeah, now that I hope I've convinced you that we need to go beyond density functional theory for modeling these kind of reactions, and then here we have since we need to go beyond a single reference, we need a single reference or single configuration. Here we need a multi-configuration self-consistent field approach. One of the most successful approaches have been this complete active space self-consistent field. So what is this concept of active space? So we know that in chemistry, molecular orbitals play a role, and molecular orbitals are where the electrons sit in a molecular configuration. And basically, in a full configuration interaction, we would include all the interactions between all the configurations that's possible for these interacting electrons. But in this active space approach, when the molecular orbitals are doubly occupied, we call it the inactive space, because those lie very low in energy and those do not participate in the reaction. And then we have this active space where we allow the configurations, we take all possible configurations within this space, and we have this virtual space which we think do not participate in the reaction. But in case if we need to recover the entire full correlation energy, we need to include all possible configurations. But for the sake of simplicity and for the ease of modeling, we use this particular approach basically. But I would like to highlight that this determination of active space for a given problem is very tricky, and we need to understand the system before we can even start making the choice of this active space. And by far, for an exact CAS-SCF calculations, people have gone up to CAS 2020. Here, the first number means the number of electrons, and the second number means the number of orbitals. So these are spatial orbitals. So we can and not spin orbitals. With many approximations, and not an SCF, it's just CAS-CI. You just calculate the energy for within the CAS space without self-consistent optimization of orbitals. They were able to go up to CAS 44 and 44. And with the DMRG, they were able to go up to like CAS 84 and 84. And I think that's kind of where we hit the limit. And practically, the problem with CAS-SCF on a classical computer is that it's almost impossible to store the wave function on a classical computer. So one of the solutions is the quantum computers. So the idea is that its ability to store multiple configurations in superposition. So without having to worry about how do we input those configurations and how do we measure, the ability to store the multiple configurations in superposition is what is driving the research on quantum computers for quantum chemistry. So what kind of problems that can be studied using these quantum computers? So one is the strong correlation. Yeah, this wave function is not normalized. This is just for the illustrative purposes. Here I show that there are two kinds of the contributions from the molecular orbitals. One is like the single configurations, where the configuration from one molecular orbital is more relatively more than the contribution from the other molecular orbital. In this case, single configuration theory, like a density functional theory, would work pretty well. But there are cases where both the molecular orbitals, here I'm just showing two, there could be more. And when these play a role, then we need a multi-configurational approach. And this arises when the energy electronic states are and the energy levels are very close to each other. And we need more advanced methods. And the second case is where the Born-Oppenheimer approximation fails. We all know that the Born-Oppenheimer approximation assumes that electrons can readjust according to the position of nuclei very rapidly. There are cases where the Born-Oppenheimer approximation fails. One of the places is called the conical intersection, where there is a degeneracy between the ground state energy of the ground electronic state and the excited electronic state. So this looks more like a cone. So that's why it is called conical intersection. And yeah, when in these places there is a simultaneous influence of electrons and the nuclei, and here we need to have more advanced approaches as well. One of these reactions where both strong correlation and conical intersection plays a role is heterogeneous photocatalysis reaction. So the reason why I introduced heterogeneous catalysis is because this is heterogeneous photocatalysis that was thermally driven, and so ground state theories work pretty well. And this is here, since there is photo here, which means it is driven by light. So what happens is that again there is a catalyst and a molecule, but since there is not enough thermal energy to drive the reaction, we need to drive the reaction using light. And then using light means that there is precise control over reaction pathways and selectivity. And there are quite a few applications that's been identified For clean energy, in this case, water dissociation and environmental remediation, we can dissociate like poisonous gases like hydrogen sulfide, which looks exactly like water, just that oxygen is replaced with sulfur. And yeah, I'm just putting the statement here. I'll explain this in the next few slides. The mechanism, this was introduced in 1972, 50 years from now, 50 years from then, and then still this reaction is not understood. So for this purpose, we have chosen the most simplistic model. We have one water molecule here, H2O, and this TiO2 is this. This is titanium. These two are oxygen atoms, and this is the oxygen atom of water, and these two are hydrogen atoms. And then here, this means light, and light excites the titanium dioxide, and this means that there is an interaction between these two systems. And this state is called the adsorption state. This is the initial state when the molecule comes closer to the catalyst. It attains some kind of equilibrium. And this is the transition state where one of the OH bonds of water elongates and comes closer to the titanium dioxide, and it's getting ready to dissociate. And then in the next state, it is completely dissociated. And completely dissociated, and this is called the dissociation. So in most of the studies so far appeared in the context of quantum computing for chemistry, although there are very few interactive systems, there is at least one or two systems where this step and this step were studied, but this step was not. Because this step is more complex to understand. This transition state is difficult to identify, and it is difficult to characterize. But we have attempted to study these three steps. Yeah, just to explain the mechanism of photochemical reactions in general. So it could be applicable for the photocatalysis as well. So we have two electronic states. One is the ground electronic state, and the other one is the excited, first excited electronic state. And what we do is we have this reactant. Here, in this case, the reactant is water, and the catalyst is titanium dioxide. So basically, we photo-excite the titanium dioxide to a higher electronic state. And this is the potential energy curve for the higher electronic state. And we see that there is a conical intersection here. If it hits this conical intersection, it can go this way as well as this way. If it hits this minima, it would come back to the reactant state and it will get stuck here. But if it has the if some of the can cross this conical intersection and reach here, again there is two possibilities here. It can come here and stay in this well, but in this case there is no products formed. And if it takes this pathway, then a photoproduct is formed. So yeah, this is just a cartoon to illustrate the example, mechanism of a photocatalytic reaction. But yeah, it can be further more complicated than this as well. So again, here you can see that this conical intersection plays a role. And again, regarding the use of density functional theory. So here, there is an example for titanium oxide dimer. In the previous slide, I showed a titanium dioxide monomer. So when you have two titanium dioxide, and you calculate the ground and the excited electronic states, and you can see that for these are the different density functional theory, exchange correlation functionals that's being used. And then you see that the energy gap between the lowest point in the first excited state and the highest point, like here, the maximum in the first excited state, the ground state is different for different functionals. And here you can see that there is a spurious conical intersection. So basically, you need to play the functional game, and we don't know which one is correct. So this is the problem with density functional for photocatalytic systems. So it's generally not applicable. And I mentioned 2 slides back that
is there some confidence that one of them is correct?
We don't know.
But is it clear that there exists one that is?
There exists one. That is why we cannot rely on these methods, and we need to use multi-configuration method. So that is, this is to illustrate that density functional theory falls short, and we need to use more advanced methods that takes into account the multi-configuration nature of these problems. Yeah, in 2 slides back, I mentioned that the mechanism of this complex reaction is not quite understood because this problem involves both multi-reference nature and the conical intersection. So there has been since it's been 50 years since this reaction was first published. So there have been multiple studies, and then in 2010, it was concluded in a review that although very challenging, the investigation of excited states associated with the behavior of water with titanium dioxide surfaces certainly deserves more intensive theoretical efforts. This was in 2010. And you can see that this author, she is one of the well-known figure in this particular field. And again, 10 years later, they publish another review saying that we need to efficiently include the strong effect of strong correlation and dynamic effects to model these systems. This is 2020. And then the methods that capture the most salient aspects of highest level electron theory, but deployable in the context of a large-scale molecular dynamics, and is needed, and that development of those kind of theories should be given priority. But the problem is, even in 2022, 23, we don't have any theory that can be both has the capability of handling the highest level electron theory and deployable in the context of larger scale. This is the state of the classical algorithms for these kind of problems. So I think it's worth exploring these reactions using a quantum computer. So, and then we cannot put this entire system on a quantum computer. So as I mentioned before, the full configuration interaction means that we include all configurations, but this scales up very quickly, and this requires more qubits. But in the NISQ era, we have very few qubits at our disposal. As I mentioned, we will be taking this active space approach. And for this system, we have like 10 electrons on water and 38 electrons on titanium dioxide, which makes a total of 48 electrons, and which means that 24 filled molecular orbitals, doubly occupied, which means again 48 spin orbitals. These are spatial orbitals, and these are spin orbitals. And for the minimal basis set, we need at least 70 spin orbitals, which means 70 qubits. But if we need to go and get a reliable energy, we need at least to do this. Use this basis set, which means that we need at least 200, on the order of 200 qubits to understand this reaction using a full configuration interaction, for example. So that is why we choose to take this active space approach. And then for the quantum part of the algorithm, we'll be using the variational quantum eigensolver. I don't think this audience needs explanation, but I'll quickly go through it. So initially, we formulate the fermionic Hamiltonian problem based on the Hartree-Fock solutions, and then we map basically form the qubit Hamiltonian, and then we have an ansatz, and this we prepare a trial state using this ansatz and parameters, and then we measure, and this goes through a loop of classical quantum hybrid loop, and then we finally measure the expectation values, and which is energy in this case. And we use a variation of this. Basically, instead of calculating the energy of one state, we calculate the average energy of 2 states in this case, or we can also include multiple states, for example. For these kind of reactions where we have more than one state involved, these states need to be orthogonal. So in this approach, we're using state averaged. These orthogonal states are guaranteed. And moreover, we need to do orbital optimization. So because I'll show you why we need to do orbital optimization. So with this ensures that the molecular orbitals are optimally rotated to get minimum energy. So that's why we need to do orbital optimization. And then the final stage will be variational quantum eigensolver. And there exists a classical analog of this algorithm, which is called the state averaged CASSCF, which is complete active space self-consistent field, which I mentioned before. Yeah, while the reason why, although there exists a classical analog of this, why do we need a quantum algorithm? Is just that after beyond a certain point, we will not be able to use this classical algorithm. So this is how it works. So basically this part, the gray part here, the orbital optimization part is purely classical. And this part, this is just the VQE, but instead of using getting one energy, minimizing one energy, we have minimized the average energy of multiple states. So that's the idea of this algorithm. This is basically this is one classical quantum loop, and this is again another loop. Actually, there are two loops. And this is one of the systems that was initially studied using this algorithm, and this is just one small molecule. This is called formaldehyde. And why is it relevant? So we have the light receptors in our eye, in the retina, that's called retinal. And this is one model system that represents that isomerization that's happening in the retinal. So basically, when you change this bending angle here, there is a conical intersection. And that is the and it isomerizes into a different form. So what happens is when we do a state average VQE without the orbital optimization in an active space of 4 electrons in 3 orbitals, so we don't see a conical intersection. So this is the ground state, and this is the first excited state energy. And this, the classical equivalent of this is called the CAS-CI, which means that it does a configuration interaction calculations within the CAS space, but there is no orbital optimization. But as soon as we include the orbital optimization here, we see that there is a conical intersection that exists between these two states. So that is the reason why we need to do orbital optimization. And for this system here, we did some classical calculations to identify the active space that is relevant. Yeah, this itself is an involving process. So we calculated the interaction energies for these 3 geometries, and we showed that with increasing active space, although there is, and we used 3 different basis sets, these are highly reliable. This is the smallest basis set, but these 2 are at least produces reliable numbers. So we did this for many different active spaces. I'm just showing 4, and then we can see that for the state where the water absorbs this titanium dioxide and the dissociated state, it's more the values we obtain from the smallest active space is qualitatively at least reproducing the trend. So, but this system, as I mentioned, this obtaining the energetics of the transition state is rather challenging, and the problem is that we need to use the same active space for these 3 geometries. Otherwise, we cannot compare the energies. So we identified that these 2 active spaces here are sufficient to reproduce the trends qualitatively. I'm not claiming any quantitative accuracy, but at least the trends are captured qualitatively. And then what we did is that we just chose the ground state. That is why it is called state specific. We targeted the state specific one state, and then we did the calculation for these 2 small active spaces on a simulator. We found that there is good agreement between the classical calculations. This is the MOLCAS, which uses a state average CAS-CF, and this is a state specific CAS-CF in this case, and this is state specific orbital optimized VQE, and there is a good agreement between the classical and the quantum results.
Sorry, what's the significance here? You're simulating a quantum computation.
Yeah, we are doing the
Classically,
yeah.
That quantum computation is meant to do the CAS.
Yes.
So if you simulate, you're just basically your code does not have a bug, right? That's the statement here, because you're solving the same system. Or is the simulated quantum calculation solving the same as what you describe on this slide? Okay, so then you're showing the significance is that you don't have a bug.
Yeah.
Okay.
And also,
It's a totally different method. No?
yeah, it's a different method actually. It's not using the quantum simulator.
The quantum simulator is not simulating the CAS-MN system.
It is.
It is.
It is.
With the same, with your whatever parameters you say, 4 and 3.
Yes.
So what are we learning from the very good agreement?
So these are 2 different algorithms. So
Yeah, 2 different algorithms to solve the same problem.
yes.
Exactly the same problem, same equations.
No, this is This CAS SCF is a different set of equations. This uses the variational quantum eigensolver. This VQE uses the variational quantum eigensolver. Here, this doesn't use it actually.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So that's traditional CAS SCF, and this is using the quantum eigensolver.
But you also did the VQE, you solved it classically, right?
Yes.
On the previous slide, you showed the classical results, including the VQE.
I mean, these are the results from the classical algorithm, and these are the results from the quantum algorithm. So,
where the quantum part is
Okay.
simulated.
yes,
It's like assuming perfect qubits,
yes, assuming perfect. Yes.
which we don't have.
Yeah.
There's not too many.
Yeah, these are not the calculations run on a hardware, but it's,
Okay, you go back one slide again. Okay, fine. Go.
these are completely
Yeah.
classical. Yes. And then we also did this state average calculations, and we calculated the energies of the ground state as well as the excited state. We resolved at the final step, and we also compared it with the classical calculations. And then we found that here due to this resolution, we lose some. There is a difference between you doing a state specific calculation and state average calculation, which means that state average calculation gives slightly different numbers, but when we calculate that, when we compare the trend compares very well. And because the advantage of state average calculation is to get two states at the cost of one calculation. So the energies of two states at the cost of one calculation. That is why we need to, and also we need to have these orthogonal states for these two, the ground and the first excited electronic state. So we need to do this state average calculations for these, so for understanding these reactions. Yeah, so with this, this is the first part of this results. And in the second part, this is basically again using water dissociation on titanium dioxide, but this time on a dimer. And we found that for this reaction, it's mostly single configuration and there is no conical intersection involved. So, but this is the model system that we can start with, because if we could understand this system better, and we also already had so much trouble in finding the active space that is relevant, that is chemically relevant. It's not that. So usually the codes here do is it takes the orbital that is the filled orbital that is closer to the Fermi level and the unfilled orbital that's closer to the Fermi level. When we define a CAS space 2, for example, that's the smallest CAS space we can define. It takes these two orbitals and these two electrons, but that may or may not be chemically relevant. So we need to identify the orbitals that is chemically relevant, and that needs to go into the CAS space. So that's the problem with this approach. We need to understand the system. So it took some time for us to, at least for me, to make sure that the right orbitals go into the system. And here, there was this beautiful experiment that was published in 2014, where they take an empty reaction cell. This is a fast flow reactor, and we have this titanium dioxide dimer, and there is a dimer with one oxygen extra. So here they do a mass spectrometry and find the peaks for this 2,4. This is 2,4 corresponds to Ti2O4, and 2,5 correspond to Ti2O5 here. And then they dose water into the system, and they see that the water absorbs to this 2,4 and 2,5. These are the peaks corresponding to that. And then as soon as they irradiate light, you can see that this 2,5 H2O peak is completely gone, which means that this system is reactive and this peak still exists. So just because there is one oxygen atom extra, this is more reactive and this is non-reactive. This does not dissociate water, but this dissociates water. So this is basically how those look like. This is the titanium dioxide dimer, and this is the water molecule which is interacting. And again, for this case, there is one oxygen atom extra. And they did some calculations. So what they did was just these black dotted lines correspond to the ground state, and these the labels with G correspond to ground state, and the labels with E correspond to the excited state. So they used DFT to do these calculations for the ground state, and they used time-dependent DFT to do these calculations, which means that they have used different geometries for the ground state as well as different geometries for the excited states. And when they corrected basically calculated the energy difference. And with respect to the free water molecule and free titanium oxide dimer, they found that these two curves intersect. So they took a geometry around this place and they did a cast SCF calculation, state average cast SCF calculation, and then they found that there exists a conical intersection. This is purely a mixture of 3 different methods in one potential energy curve, which is not very well appreciated in the community. And they say that, okay, just because this crossed, and so this reaction is probable to occur, and we can obtain products. And this reaction is important because here we studied one is the water dissociation, the other one is hydrogen peroxide production. This is also one of the most well-studied systems in this context. So, but the problem is that this potential energy curve contains mixture of 3 different methods. So we thought, okay, can we do it with one? Can we be consistent? And yeah, since in the previous system we did not find a conical intersection, we thought since there is a conical intersection here, we just wanted to explore this further. And what we did was only last week using so even for this in this paper they found a conical intersection with the cast space of 10.7. So here with the cast space of 4.3, even using a smaller basis set, we were able to find a conical intersection here. So here the round empty circles and empty circles correspond to the ground state energy. Empty squares correspond to the first excited state energy using a classical algorithm. And you can see that this solid circles and solid squares are the results from the state average orbital-optimized VQE, and we were able to find a conical intersection. So what is the reaction coordinate here? So what happens is that the distance between these two, the conical intersection is lifted when the distance between this oxygen atom and this oxygen atom in the system increases actually. So you can see that the geometry here and geometry here could be different, looks different, but since there are 2 oxygen atoms here already in this titanium, so the incoming water molecule is not able to absorb on this, but it undergoes a rearrangement where this water molecules move to here. And this, again, the mechanism is not confirmed. This could be anything. And the presence of this extra oxygen atom is what drives the dissociation of water on this particular dimer. So that is why, so basically this distance here is the distance between this oxygen and this oxygen. Yeah, so
Can you say again why this comes out of this graph? Because I mean,
sorry?
Why does this come out of this graph?
So when we increase the distance between these two, so basically if the reaction needs to happen, it is at the higher excited state. If it has to come to ground state, it has to, there should be a pathway. So this is the pathway. So for example, if this is the excited state, it has a, sorry.
Yeah, so sorry, go back to this because I think that's important. On the black curve,
yeah,
it's actually an uphill reaction, right? So you need to photo-excite to the excited state on the left of that curve, and then it becomes a downhill reaction.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
So you switch curves basically there at this point.
Yes, you switch curves.
And this side, it looks confusing because of the 2 plots on the right half. The one is flipped with respect to the other.
It's not, it's flipped in the sense that that is why I was trying to explain that the incoming water molecule directly cannot absorb on this titanium because the valency of this titanium is already satisfied by the presence of this oxygen, extra oxygen atom. So this is, in chemical terms, it's called sterically hindered. So it cannot come directly here and attach. So it attaches here and it undergoes some rearrangement. And then it needs to come to this side for this dissociation to happen. So this reaction, this mechanism for this water molecule moving from here to here is not identified. So that is also, that could also be further explored. So yeah, that is why this is confusing. So I'm sorry, but this is what is happening. The presence of this oxygen atom here is what is driving the reaction. Yeah. To summarize these results, so we have calculated the interaction energies of water with titanium dioxide using the state average or state specific orbital optimized VQE. And yeah, for this reactions using where strong correlation is present and the wave function is of multi-form configuration nature, this particular algorithm is helpful. And also when there is the involvement of ground in excited states, this algorithm will be helpful. And yeah, this is VQE and its variations. We don't have an option, but in the near term, that's what is being explored in the context of chemistry and mostly explored. And we are still in the exploration stage for these reactions because most of the literature exists on calculating the accurate energetics of a given molecule. So yeah, that's good, but unless and until we include some kind of a bond dissociation, there is no chemistry actually. And finding a good active space is very challenging. There are research groups working on automating the identification of active space for these class calculations, but it is still in the very infant stages. Yeah, we have performed some calculations on the hardware, but still it is being analyzed. We need to move further towards more realistic models. Like these are very, very small clusters. We need to go for slightly larger clusters to understand how the effect of surface and yeah, we need to include the effect of solvents to get more realistic. And we are also looking at some kind of embedding schemes where we can only take the part which is where the water is directly reacting with titanium, that part to be on the quantum computer and the rest on a classical computer. So we are also looking into those embedding schemes as well. And yeah, so for these calculations on the hardware, we need to do error mitigations, otherwise those numbers don't make much sense. One of the advertisements that the IBM Open Science Prize was announced in 2022, and in January, Joris Katamole and myself, we started collaborating on working on this particular project. This was basically kind of a side project where we have we were supposed to calculate the ground state energy of this particular spins on Kagame lattice, and this is what it is. And we have the hardware with the heavy hex coupling graph, so we need to map this to here. So Joris came up with this idea of line graph qubit routing, and basically we worked on this and yet to hear the results. And yeah, just on time, we uploaded a paper on archive yesterday. So this is fresh out of the press. So in case if you are interested in routing, and thank you all for your attention.